Hi everyone, happy Monday. My name's Cleo and I want to welcome everyone to Mind the Gap. And today's episode is a special request from Noelle, who is a great follower and viewer of our Instagram as well as the YouTube channel. Noelle's suggestion is that I do a glossary of some of the terms that I use. We're not going to start out with too many vocabulary words because I don't want to overwhelm you, but I think I'm going to hit the top ones that make the most sense and apply the most to what I talk about every time I go on these lives. There's a couple of them that you could literally research for days, weeks, months, years, and a lifetime before you had the full story on them. I don't claim to be a theological expert, so I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. This is it, the official Cleo Osborne glossary for Mind the Gap. I'd like to get started with the word I throw around the most, the phrase evangelical Christian. If you live in America, you've always heard someone tell you that they're a Christian, very Catholic, like the most Catholic person. You call someone a WASP, which includes the word Protestant. Oh, they're so Christian, or they go to church all the time. Or she's really Christian, she doesn't, drink. Oh, my friend got born again. You just hear a lot of phrases thrown around with relation to the word Christian, but I just wanted to be sure we're all working with the same definition here when it comes to what I'm talking about. At the very core, today's evangelical Christians are definitely Protestant. These people believe that you can speak directly to God. There's no go-between like the Pope. There's no focus on the Virgin Mary. They do believe that you must be saved. It takes over your life. It's not just something that kind of comes along. Jesus died on the cross for your sins. You give your life over to him and you enter into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And that's the part that, you guys have probably heard about. From a theological standpoint, it's extremely conservative. Translations of the Bible that are allowed to be used in these denominations are specific. So you can't just show up to an evangelical, like a truly evangelical church with just any translation of the Bible. Really hardcore ones, like you need to have your New King James Version or a King James Version. There's a lot of history going back to the 18th and 19th centuries when it comes to the big Great Awakenings. And that's kind of where modern evangelical tradition gets its start. In a way, it's actually a very new concept. You send missionaries out into every potential land, every potential country. The more remote, the better. There's this, great commission that's been given by Jesus, which is, go ye into the world and preach the gospel. Your goal when you wake up every morning is basically to tell as many people as possible that they need to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and they will be saved. Just very Puritan, just a very literal interpretation of the Bible. Of course, conveniently, when terrible things like genocide and polygamy and incest and horrible violence are happening in the Bible, you just kind of push that aside. You bring in the angry God when you need to on Sunday when you want to do an altar call or something. The verses are very cherry-picked. And there are an estimated 285 million evangelicals in America right now. That leads me to our second definition, Christian nationalism. 20% of Americans have responded to being Christian nationalists. I'm not using that term, but answering surveys that define them as Christian nationalists. When you hear all the talk about what the founding fathers meant, the founding fathers intended this to be a Christian nation. They kind of ascribe a moral worth to white, natural-born, conservative citizens of this country, which on its face is inherently extremely racist and classist, and they think it's too easy for a lot of people to vote, and they're constantly practicing voter suppression, gerrymandering, redlining. You hear them using words like heritage, patriotism. So when you hear about Christian nationalism, it completely obliterates the history of indigenous people. It completely whitewashes slavery and everything surrounding that. So these are the people that don't want critical race theory taught in schools. They're the ones that are like, the slaves were better off. They were being better treated on the plantations than they would have been living back in Africa woman. They love their owner. They had a great life here. That does lead us into purity culture. The purity culture that I grew up familiar with was cover yourself as much as possible. Women's bodies and skin and appearances were automatic stumbling blocks to the men who are very visual creatures and can't help themselves. They're basically these, sexual animals who can't help but be turned on by like all the women and girls around them. My personal story that really sticks with me is I was like maybe 11 years old and I had on a red skirt that I was wearing to church, and my dad sat me down on the way out and he's like, you can't wear this skirt to church, it's too short. And it was just, like a knee length boring skirt. It wasn't anything special. And I was so sad because this was a pretty red skirt that I liked and thought was cute. My dad had to tell me, if you wear this to church, the boys will think it looks sexy, which was such an embarrassing word for me to hear at that age. I was sobbing. I was so embarrassed. I was like, I can't believe that like this is my fault. Like, why can't I just wear this skirt I like? Your father is basically the person who's taking care of you and guarding your heart and guarding your body, guarding your sexuality. Many girls in the evangelical community do a whole purity ring ceremony where they pledge their virginity. Their dad gives them a ring. It's very rampant and normal though. Like I have tons of friends who did it. It's different degrees of intensity based on the specific denomination you're in and how strict the church is, but it's so damaging because you are brought up with the responsibility that it's up to you to keep the boys from sinning or lusting in their hearts, and that's all on you. And then there's all these, exercises you do about like, chewing a piece of gum, and then they're like, give the other person, your piece of gum, and they're like, ooh, no, I don't want that chewed piece of gum, and they're like, that's what it's like when you give yourself away to someone. No one wants a chewed piece of gum, and they're just trying to discourage you from having premarital sex. People in their teens are learning about how a woman who has lost her virginity is completely worthless. She's lost the most important thing. By this point, there are so many girls who have been sexually abused, so it's too late for them. So they're being told like, oh no, my sexual assault was my fault and I'm worthless. These girls, start just going through horrible trauma because no one says anything about it. Like if it was, forced upon you, if you were, sexually assaulted or raped, it wasn't your fault. It's always your fault because you're the woman who has to cover herself up to keep the men from stumbling. The church always covers up sexual assault. You guys know that. I don't have to include that. So you're supposed to be this completely sexless human being, and then you're supposed to, you're supposed to court a guy, which means your parents are watching you while you date, and then he asks for your hand in marriage, and you get married, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to have, a great and wonderful sex life when you're married. Be at the beck and call of your husband whenever he wants to have sex. You go from basically your dad being in charge of your, protecting your virginity like it's the medieval times, and your virginity is something you're giving along with some goats and horses and property to your, arranged marriage. And then you go to your husband, who is now the head of your household, that you must submit to. Next thing, it's the word deconstruction. For people like me, which I'm the only person I can speak for, who was literally steeped in one church or another from first day I can remember, your entire world is shaped by how your religion permeates your everyday life. A quote that I really like is, deconstruction is not destruction. So when you wake up one day and decide to start deconstructing and you find out it's a thing you can do, you're not saying, I'm throwing my faith out the window and I'm going to become an atheist. How do I get there? That's not what it is at all. You're deconstructing what you were raised with. So in my case, you're identifying each component of your faith and you're kind of taking it apart piece by piece, just like what it sounds like. And you're keeping the things that are useful and you're discarding the things that are harmful. For lack of a better word, you were brainwashed by this particular life for so long. You're just getting deprogrammed. The final definition that we will do today, religious trauma, And for me, that means growing up around the end times culture. My mom told us every day that Jesus was going to come back any minute. It was a threat. Like, none of you girls are ready. I know you're not really Christians. Like, you're going to be left behind. It's very literal. It was like, you will hear a trumpet outside the window, an actual trumpet. All the dead bodies in the graves are going to rise up in the air, and all the live people who are Christians are going to rise up in the air. Then all of the cars that are being driven by Christians, they won't have drivers, so they're going to start crashing into each other. Planes with Christian pilots are going to crash into each other, and y'all are going to be here getting like cars crashed into you and planes crashing into you. There was no confusion about what was going to happen. Horror and death and destruction. And our mom was going to disappear. And this was told to us every day. And these are little girls, little tiny anxious girls who didn't have a lot of life experience. And on top of that, I've already talked about the end times movies, right? You get guillotined if you say that you're a Christian. And thirdly, government takes over, you've got the mark of the beast. Apparently all these people, I don't know who they are, holding guns to our mom's head saying, your 5 children are standing here and you're telling us you're a Christian. Do you believe in God or not? Girls, you know I love you, but if I have to choose between you and my faith in God, you know I'll have to tell those men, whoever they are, I'm a Christian and I'm going to get shot right in front of you, and you need to be prepared for that. Those are some of the definitions that I promised you, and we'll do some more definitions, but I hope those helped, and I hope that they made sense, and I hope that a lot of my viewers who are familiar with the terms will weigh in. Black Lives Matter, mind the gap.